how good this C63 Coupe is. Before we start today, I want to remind you petrol heads about something many of us saw back in the day. It was that helmet guy with the M3, Clarkson with the brand new then C63 Axe Murderer, and a bet over an apple. For the AMG fan, an unacceptable conclusion. Tastes better than M-Town too. An apple a day, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed that little nod to my favorite ever Top Gear episode. But before we burn more tires and create more smoke, as is the title of this video, we're going to explore the origins of the brand that is so close to my heart, AMG. And then we will return to the road with the question of what makes an AMG, and the new C63 S Wagon will be the focal point. But as this is Avengers Endgame week, I figure why don't we use the Infinity Stones to go back in time? Figure Thanos won't be needing this anymore, so we'll use the Time Stone. And now the year is 1965, and Mercedes Benz just decided to discontinue all motorsport activities. And for two engineers who worked at engine development for Mercedes at the time, Hans Werner Aufrecht and Erhard Melcher, this was disastrous news. These two engineers were working on the 300 SE engine for the purposes of motorsport at this time. So this was a huge blow dealt to their dreams. Sometimes the companies we work for and the brands that we love err in their judgment, but that didn't stop Hans Werner Aufrecht from going towards his dreams. So alongside his colleague, they continued work in 1966 on that racing engine, and with fellow Daimler employee and racing driver Manfred Scheich, they went to the German Car Touring Championship and won 10 times over with this engine, immediately getting the reputation of creating great motorsport engines independently. But that wasn't enough for Mr. Aufrecht. So in 1966, he took the scary decision of leaving his full-time employment with Daimler alongside his colleague and setting up shop in Bergstall, and the company's name was to be AMG Racing Engine Development. The A for Aufrecht, M for Melcher, and G for Grossaspach, which was Aufrecht's hometown where he was born. So AMG was born in 1967 officially. And at this time, the team managed to buy a used 300 SEL, and they took that car and they developed it even further. So they gave it wider arches on the front. They reduced the weight of the car. They took the V8 engine and increased its capacity from 6.6 and bored out to 6.8. And then they took this car to the 24-hour race at the Nürburgring. Now you can imagine when the commentators, the spectators and the team saw this, they took the piss out of the car. It was a large saloon here to do the 24-hour Nürburgring race. And they called it the Red Pig. And this wasn't meant to highlight the best parts of the car, let's say. But 24 hours later and a set of drop jaws later, this car had won within its class as the champion and came second overall only because it had to keep stopping for fuel, which sounds like our modern AMGs. And so the legend of the Red Pig was cemented, and AMG became an overnight sensation with news and documentaries going all over the world, showing how this small little team managed to make a race-winning car out of a large luxury saloon. What an amazing story. And in 1976, AMG was growing rapidly, as was the demand for their motorsport services in the racing world. So they moved to Affalterbach, where they are today. And if you look at the modern AMG crest, as we have in a lot of our cars, you will notice on the left-hand side, there is a tree. That tree is actually the crest of the town of Affalterbach, and you won't believe what it's a tree of. It's actually a red apple tree. The irony with this video, right? And in fact, outside of the AMG building area at Aufrecht even today, there is a massive basket of apples for all the engine builders and visitors for them to come and have apples. At this point in the 80s now, AMG and Mercedes were working a lot closer together. And perhaps the most notable partnership between them was with the 190, and you guys will recognize it more as its Evo fame or its Cosworth fame. And the DTM championships, they won over 50 times with this car. My favorite bit to do with the 190 though has to be with Ayrton Senna making his name during the reopening of the then new Nürburgring, beating massive racing names and making a name for himself just with the road-going version of this car. And then in 1984, Melcher created a completely independent cylinder head with 4 valves per cylinder, long before Mercedes Benz was using this technology. And shortly after that, in 1986, they created the first car that would really put AMG on the map as far as customers and the rest of the world was concerned. And that was when they took an E-Coupe and stuck that 5-litre V8 with that technology into it. And then the Hammer was born, as it was aptly and quickly named. And just look at it, it's a blueprint for the amazing AMGs that we have today with the wider body, monoblock wheels, crazy engine, great sound, and it had the performance to match. This thing was doing 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, back when something like the M5 was doing it in 7. 1986 was also important because another certain AMG lunatic was born at that time. Okay, sorry. No surprise then that when this legend was created, Mercedes could see that they were onto something with this little tuning company. And so an official cooperation between AMG and Daimler was created at this time. So now AMG had access to the dealer-wide network of Mercedes-Benz dealers, and you could even maintain your AMG bits from there. You could buy power upgrades, wheels, cosmetic stuff, etc. Now all of that sounds quite a lot like other tuners back then, you know, Lorenza and Barabbas. And if anything, AMG was very much like that. I mean, you guys probably won't know this. There was a very weird time in AMG history where this car was created. It's actually a Mitsubishi Galant AMG. I guess someone needed more zeros on that bank balance, huh? Fast forwarding through these confusing times came the first proper AMG to be sold by Mercedes direct to its customers. And it was based off the W202 first gen of the C-Class, and it was the C63 AMG. Now this was essentially a C280 that was taken to Aufrecht, deconstructed, and the inline-6 played with, and it turns into a C36 to fight the M3. After this came the C43 AMG, which is perhaps better known. Not to be confused with our modern cars, this actually had a 4.3 litre V8. So it sounded great. It was more in line with what we have today. You'll also note during this time, the previous AMG logo up to this point was just AMG. But now you've got the Sportline stripes, which came from the Evo 2 and Mercedes sport cars, added to the AMG logo to signify this very close bond between the two companies, and hence the basic modern AMG logo was created. Fast forwarding past many AMG models, the sale of many alloy wheels and body kits at dealerships, we come to one of the most pivotal years for AMG, and that was 1999. And this was the year that Daimler finally bought a majority stake in AMG of 51% from Mr. Aufrecht, finally making AMG a subsidiary of Daimler itself. But that's not all that was going on this year. Our current CEO of AMG, Tobias Moors, then became the head of modern line at AMG. But that wasn't it. This was also the year where the CLK GTR was being built wholly at Aufrecht for those lucky 25 customers, the road-going version. It's also the first car that our friend of RBR, Michael Kubler, was privileged enough to make engines for. And that wasn't it. Speaking of Mike, this was also the year that Pagani made their first Zonda C12 using a Mercedes V12, and then the Zonda S using the AMG V12 tuned engine. A huge, huge year of development from AMG. In 2001, AMG took their 5.4 litre V8 and supercharged, or as they call compressor, creating another legendary unit. And now look at something that it created. Here is the E55 of the time that UK magazine Autocar said was faster than a Ferrari 360 and a Lambo Murcielago in real-world uses. So these AMGs were becoming really desirable in the world. But equally at the same time, all that they were becoming known for was straight-line speed, loud looks, loud sound, and not even a hint of driving dynamics. And that bad rep, it even follows into today's exceedingly capable cars. That's what that era was like. Fast forward now to 2003 and things are becoming really serious as far as driving dynamics go. At this time, Mercedes owned 40% of McLaren because of all the motorsport stuff, and they set out to create this, the Mercedes Benz SLR McLaren. Of course, this is an icon now. You guys know as much about it as I do with the butterfly doors, the iconic F1 nose design. This car had an engine actually from AMG, and it was that same 5.4 litre supercharged engine, but it was modified specifically for the SLR. It's also important to note that this was one of the first cars that current design chief Gordon Wagoner was involved in for Mercedes-Benz. And generally, this car was a signal to the world that MB could still be involved in the supercar scene. But I'm sure that there were some at AMG who were thinking, surely if the whole project was just left to us, we could have done it as good job. And eventually they would get a chance. Not long after this, in 2005, finally Daimler bought the rest of the shares of AMG from Mr. Aufrecht, and Mercedes AMG was born, a fully owned subsidiary of Mercedes Benz. And it wasn't long after this that they started the creation of their first ever from ground up engine, and that is now the legendary M156 6.2 litre naturally aspirated gorgeous beauty. Here it is in its final form of C63 Black Series. Here's why it won so many awards. Here's why it's got its legendary status. It's just simply one of the best sounding and performing V8s ever. Also, speaking of Black Series, during this time, this was the year that the first ever Black Series was created, and that was the less well-known SLK Black Series, a very rare car. Now, during this time, AMG were plotting another mental car, and that was the iconic first C63 AMG, the axe murderer with headlights, as coined by Clarkson in that very episode that we gave tribute to today. It was an absolutely mental car, using that 6.2 litre V8 in a little C-Class. It was unheard of, but it set the precedent for cars to come afterwards, and it was the turning point as far as driving dynamics at AMG, with people like Tobias Moores in the background, pushing things to be more like the way Mr. Aufrecht had the original idea for the company, more to do with driving dynamics and amazing engines. And you'd be forgiven for forgetting the M3 of this time, but most petrol heads would love to have this C63 in their garage as a car to keep forever. And every car that then had this 6.2 litre new unit really had to be taken seriously because the engine was brilliant, apart from maybe that R63. Yeah. Fast forward now to 2010, and AMG finally get the chance to show what they are made of, and they make a car from scratch completely, not based on a Mercedes Benz like the past. And that was the iconic, the legendary, the gorgeous SLS AMG Gullwing. What an absolute beauty. It's more in the spirit of the 300 SL than the SLR could have ever been. It was more attuned to driving dynamics than that car. It had that lovely 6.2 litre naturally aspirated engine, but its own version of it. It is just an icon. It is a legend. It's one of the greatest cars ever made, in my opinion. And now the modern AMG GT family continues that tradition of driving performance and a pure AMG not based on any other Mercedes Benz. And the GTs really sit today as the purest form of motorsport AMG that you can get. They are truly exciting. And with that new GT family, AMG created probably what was the best turbo V8 in modern history. And I don't think they get enough credit for that because of how good this and the new C63S sound. Everyone was fearful of the 6.2 litre going and this engine coming. But this, the natural power curve, the torque that it has over the 6.2 and AMG's ability to get amazing sound out of it, it's just a brilliant, brilliant engine. With the beast of the green hell sitting as the flagship and a GT Black Series on the way, you can really see how AMG care about driving dynamics now. They chase after lap times as well, with the GT63S being the quickest four-door, the GLC 63S the quickest SUV, and the E63S the quickest wagon, all on the Nürburgring. Now, regardless of what anyone will tell you, as good as the 6.2 litre C63 was, this C63S with the 4 litre, with its dynamic engine mounts, with its clever suspension, is the best C63 that they have ever made. And that's why it's our focal point for today. So today I want to pose the question, why is it that an AMG addict loves AMGs? Why do we buy AMGs? And I think for a lot of us, the first time that that addiction started was this. That first startup of the exhaust. I think it probably rings in our minds as the first memory for a lot of us as to why we love these cars. But it goes beyond that. I think there are three main reasons that we buy AMGs. First is dynamic ability, and that includes lap times and the smoky tyre stuff. Then you've got looks. AMG addicts love driving something that looks monstrous. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the sound. We're addicted to the AMG sound in all of its iterations. So let's go through each of those. Now you're asking, why have I chosen this car when I could have chosen, say, an AMG GTR or a lot of other cars that could have hit those three nails on the head? But there's a reason why the C63 stands out as the AMG. And especially here in wagon form. The reason for that is, it's in the spirit of the original AMGs. It's taking what is essentially a family carrying wagon, a really practical car, and making it as loony and as mental as possible in the spirit of that old Red Pig and the original Hammer. That's why the C63, I think, is the epitome of AMG. So let's prove that today. So let's look at the first one first, and that is driving performance. This is still the axe murderer with headlights, I promise you. It's probably one of the best drifting cars in the world. Still, it's just so good. It's just got such a predictable rear end, and it just makes it so fun to do dynamic stuff. And it's this type of driving that was often displayed by Chris Harris or Jethro Bovingdon that would draw me back again and again as a fan and as a customer to the C63 because of what it can do. Well, that's just one side of the C63, at least nowadays. It also has the ability to zip the lips shut of the old auto-journers who before only had eyes for the M3. Now it's a proper good handling car. See, the modern car has to battle a lot in order to be dynamic. They're generally heavier than cars of old. They generally have electronic steering setup rather than hydraulic. And the great thing about the C63 is it benefits from the best electrical steering in the world, in my opinion. In terms of pure feedback of where the front wheels are, what the front end is doing, it all comes through immediately through the steering wheel. And I can only really discern the difference between this and the Black Series, which has that hydraulic steering, when I drive them back to back on track. And that is like really driving hard. So this steering is really bloody good. Now I mentioned weight, and this S model gets active engine mount. So what that does is takes the main weight of the car and makes it work with you rather than against you in basic terms. And then it kind of shrinks the car around you in corners and makes it feel lighter than it really is. And what you're left with is just a really epic handling car. You pair that with the brilliant steering, the really clever suspension, and you're left with a car that has the most epic handling next to the Giulia Quadrifoglio. I absolutely love this car. And then you come to looks, and looks are so important for the AMG customer, especially in the modern era, because we're not satiated with just the nip and tuck that the old AMGs used to have, because these cars are that much closer now to cars like the GTR. So we want to see that visual link. And although this car is based on a family wagon, and from some angles it will fool you into still thinking that, and some specs, you do see that link immediately, especially with that historic grille on the front, the gigantic air intakes, the wider front arches, the carbon ceramic brakes hiding behind the black multi-spokes, the gigantic new rear pipes that you get on the facelift version, and the extreme rear diffuser. All of it gives away the fact that this is a car firmly linked to cars like the AMG GTR, and that is what the AMG customer craves. And then of course the final one, which is sound. I'm at the moment in race mode, and you've probably heard the sound already as we've been driving the car. It's just intoxicating, whether it's the build-up of the revs of this lovely Hot V setup V8, whether it's those unmistakable pops and bangs as you let off the throttle and you hear the machine gun fire behind you. Just no one has been able to get the sound of these bi-turbo engines to sound as good as AMG have. No one has. And that's what makes the modern one such an exciting proposition. that's what really makes us yearn for these cars. And the addition of the particle filter has done little to mute the volume or the sound of this. Yes, it's got a bit more E63 in the way that it delivers the revs, but it's got that unmistakable AMG sound. But then you can switch it back into comfort and it will just go along with a menacing growl, and you can go along your daily business. And nothing else offers you that in the market. This is the only V8 available in this segment now. It's the only one with the character of engine note that can give you both of these worlds. To conclude, I think now we have reached the peak of AMG. I've always said the C63 is the quintessential one, and this one is, according to the boss Tobias Moores, the last 8-cylinder C63. Now, whatever the next one might be, whatever the engine configuration is, it's not going to be 8-cylinder. So guys, savor this car, savor the pre-facelift, the 204. These cars will not be seen again, however good AMG make the next ones. If you're into the V8, that pureness of the original AMGs, this is the last of the quintessential AMGs. Please, please savor this peak of AMG perfection now. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this tribute to the AMG icon and to AMG history. If you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe, share the video, and you know what I'm going to say, time to have some more fun.